Margaret Maggie Sullivan arrived at the Denver federal courthouse like an avenging angel wrapped in a modest gray coat, her silver hair pinned back with the precision of someone who had spent 43 years as a registered nurse before discovering that the man she had trusted as a colleague was a monster. At 67, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had delivered difficult news to countless families, but today her hands trembled as she clutched a worn leather briefcase containing evidence that would either save justice or condemn her to a lifetime of guilt for her silence. Emma Thornton watched from the courthouse steps as the elderly nurse approached, thunder at her side immediately alerting to something significant about this new arrival. The German Shepherd's body language shifted from protective vigilance to what Emma had learned to recognize as his response to someone carrying crucial information, ears forward, tail low but moving, eyes locked onto the approaching figure with intense focus. "Detective Thornton?" Maggie's voice carried the slight tremor of someone who had spent sleepless nights wrestling with conscience and fear. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. I worked at Dr. Crawford's clinic for 8 months before I understood what he was really doing to those children." She opened her briefcase with hands that shook despite her determination. "I've been praying for the courage to come forward, and when I heard on the news that he might be released, I knew God was calling me to act." The contents of Maggie's briefcase would prove to be the evidence that shattered Crawford's carefully constructed defense. Medical records going back 15 years, financial documents showing payments to adoption agencies that didn't exist, and most damning of all, audio recordings she had made secretly during her final weeks at the clinic when she had begun to suspect that Crawford's grief therapy sessions were something far more sinister. FBI agent Sarah Collins arrived within minutes of Emma's urgent phone call, and her reaction to Maggie's evidence was immediate and decisive. "Mrs. Sullivan, what you've brought us changes everything. These records show a pattern of criminal activity spanning multiple decades, with clear evidence of personal enrichment and child endangerment that goes far beyond any federal authorization Crawford might have possessed." The audio recordings were particularly devastating. In Crawford's own voice, captured during what he believed were private conversations with his staff, he outlined his philosophy with chilling clarity. "Grief makes people stupid and desperate. They'll pay anything, believe anything, do anything to get their children back. We're not trafficking children. We're providing hope to people who can afford it and homes to children who need them. It's supply and demand, basic economics." Thunder's reaction to Crawford's recorded voice was immediate and violent. The German Shepherd began barking with the same desperate intensity he had shown at the airport, his body trembling with recognition and rage. Emma had to physically restrain her partner as the recordings continued, revealing conversations about dosing schedules for sedatives, transportation logistics for moving unconscious children, and most horrifyingly, discussions about disposal methods for children who proved difficult to place. Dorothy Williams listened to the recordings with the expression of growing horror and vindication. "That man looked me in the eye and told me I was delusional, that my grief was making me see things that weren't there," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "All the while, he knew exactly where my grandson was and what had been done to him." Maggie's testimony filled in the gaps that had been puzzling investigators for days. Crawford's operation wasn't just about adopting out kidnapped children. It was a sophisticated network that created false identities for buyers, provided medical documentation to support illegal adoptions, and maintained a pipeline of children for wealthy clients who couldn't or wouldn't go through legitimate adoption channels. He had clients who specifically requested certain physical characteristics, Maggie revealed, her nurse's clinical detachment barely masking her moral outrage. Blonde hair, blue eyes, specific ages. Children weren't just inventory to him, they were custom orders to be filled. She looked at Dorothy with professional compassion. Ethan fit a profile for a client in Switzerland who had been waiting 18 months for a 4-year-old boy with his exact coloring. The international scope of Crawford's network explained the sophisticated pharmaceuticals found in Ethan's system and the professional-grade false documentation that had initially made Ashley Chen Murphy's identity so convincing. Crawford had been operating what amounted to a boutique child trafficking service for clients who could afford to pay premium prices for specific children. Collins's investigation team had been working around the clock since Maggie's arrival, and their findings painted a picture of systemic corruption that reached far beyond Crawford's individual crimes. "We've identified at least 6 other medical professionals in 4 different states who were part of his network," Collins reported. "This wasn't one rogue doctor. This was an organized criminal enterprise that used legitimate medical facilities as fronts for trafficking operations." The evidence also revealed the true scope of Thunder's instinctive recognition of danger. Crawford's original facility in Montana, where he had worked as a veterinary consultant before transitioning to human psychology, had been the site of experiments using animals to test sedatives and behavioral modification techniques. Thunder's violent reaction to Crawford wasn't just protective instinct. It was recognition of someone who had directly caused him trauma years earlier. "Your dog was one of their test subjects," Maggie told Emma quietly. "Crawford used animals to perfect the drug combinations he later used on children. The records show a German Shepherd matching Thunder's description underwent multiple experimental procedures before being released to animal control." She looked at Thunder with deep sadness. That's why he knew. He remembered. Dr. James Harrison arrived with additional evidence from Ethan's continued therapy sessions that corroborated Maggie's testimony in disturbing detail. "Ethan has been recovering more memories as the drugs leave his system," Harrison reported. "He's described a facility with other children in beds, medical equipment, and adults in white coats who spoke different languages. His descriptions match the layout of the Switzerland facility that authorities raided yesterday." The international raids had been coordinated simultaneously across multiple countries, revealing the true global scope of Crawford's operation. Children recovered from facilities in Switzerland, Canada, and Mexico were being processed through DNA databases to identify their origins and begin the process of reunification with their biological families. Emily Rodriguez, whose manipulation by Crawford had made her an unwitting accomplice in Ethan's kidnapping, provided additional testimony that painted a picture of sophisticated psychological control. "He didn't just convince me that Ethan was my son," she told investigators. "He made me believe that taking him was an act of love, that I was saving him from a life of poverty and neglect." Her recovery from Crawford's brainwashing was ongoing, but her cooperation was providing crucial insights into his methods. The legal implications of Maggie's evidence were immediate and decisive. Crawford's claims of federal immunity crumbled in the face of proof that his activities had extended far beyond any authorized investigation and had involved personal profit on a massive scale. Within hours of reviewing Maggie's documentation, federal prosecutors filed additional charges, including racketeering, international trafficking, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping across state lines. Thunder's role in the investigation had evolved from initial alert dog to key witness in exposing a criminal network that had operated for decades. His recognition of Crawford's threat, his protective response to Ethan, and his connection to the original Montana facility had provided crucial elements of the case that human investigators might have missed entirely. Dorothy's vindication was complete, but the emotional cost of learning the full scope of what her grandson had endured was devastating. "To think that there are people in this world who see children as merchandise," she said, holding Ethan's hand as he slept peacefully for the first time since his rescue. "How do we explain to him that adults he trusted hurt him deliberately?" Dr. Harrison's response carried the wisdom of someone who had spent his career helping children recover from unimaginable trauma. "We don't explain it all at once," he said gently. "We help him understand that what happened wasn't his fault, that the people who rescued him care about him, and that he's safe now. Children are remarkably resilient when they have adults they can trust. The media response to Crawford's arrest and the revelation of his international trafficking network dominated national news coverage for weeks. Thunder became a symbol of the importance of trusting animal instincts and the bond between humans and their animal partners in law enforcement. His story inspired legislation requiring enhanced training for K-9 units in recognizing human trafficking situations. Emma's personal closure came with the discovery of records indicating that her sister Sarah had indeed been processed through an early version of Crawford's network 20 years earlier. While Sarah's ultimate fate remained unknown, the knowledge that her disappearance was connected to a criminal enterprise rather than random chance provided a form of resolution that Emma had never expected to find. Maggie Sullivan's courage in coming forward despite personal risk exemplified the power of individual conscience to overcome institutional corruption. Her testimony not only ensured Crawford's conviction, but also provided closure for dozens of families whose children had been recovered from his network. As the legal proceedings continued, one fact became clear. Thunder's desperate bark at Denver International Airport had exposed one of the most sophisticated child trafficking operations in American history, saving not just Ethan Williams, but potentially hundreds of other children who might have become victims of Crawford's network. The investigation was far from over, but the foundation of justice had been restored through the unlikely combination of an elderly nurse's moral courage, a grandmother's unwavering love, and a traumatized dog's instinct to protect the innocent. 6 months after Thunder's desperate bark had shattered the normalcy of Gate B7, Dorothy Williams' small apartment had transformed into something that resembled a home filled with purpose rather than mere survival. The cramped living room now overflowed with thank-you letters from families whose children had been recovered from Crawford's network, drawings from Ethan depicting Thunder as a superhero with a cape, and framed photographs documenting their journey from nightmare to healing. Emma Thornton arrived for their weekly Sunday dinner carrying Thunder's favorite treats and a folder of updates from the ongoing federal investigation. The apartment smelled of Dorothy's famous pot roast, a recipe she had perfected during her years of raising Ethan alone, and the sound of the 4-year-old's laughter echoed from the bedroom where he was building elaborate towers with blocks, narrating adventures where brave dogs rescued children from bad dreams. Thunder had undergone his own transformation during the months of recovery. The hypervigilance that had defined his behavior since the airport incident had gradually softened into a more relaxed protectiveness, though he still positioned himself where he could maintain visual contact with both Ethan and the apartment's entrance. His bond with the child had evolved into something that transcended his K-9 training, a friendship built on shared trauma and mutual healing. "You know, honey," Dorothy said as she set plates around her small dining table, "I've been thinking about what that dog taught us all." Her voice carried the philosophical weight of someone who had stared into the abyss of human cruelty and chosen to focus on the light she had found there. "Thunder didn't just save Ethan that day. He saved my faith in doing the right thing, even when everyone thinks you're crazy, Doctor." Crawford's trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with convictions on 47 federal charges, including racketeering, international child trafficking, and conspiracy. His network had been completely dismantled, resulting in the recovery of 89 children from facilities across 6 countries. The judge had imposed multiple life sentences, ensuring Crawford would never again have the opportunity to harm children. Emma's personal revelation about her sister Sarah had brought unexpected closure to a 20-year-old wound. While Sarah's ultimate fate remained unknown, DNA evidence recovered from Crawford's early facilities had provided confirmation that she had been processed through his network. The knowledge that her disappearance wasn't random but part of a systematic criminal enterprise had allowed Emma to finally stop wondering if there was something more she could have done to find her sister. Ethan emerged from his bedroom dragging a well-worn stuffed dog that bore a remarkable resemblance to Thunder, a gift from the hospital staff who had cared for him during his recovery. "Grandma Dot, can Thunder stay for our movie tonight?" he asked with the innocent confidence of a child who had learned that the adults in his life would move heaven and earth to make him feel safe. The child's psychological recovery had been remarkable, aided by consistent therapy with Dr. Harrison and the stable, loving environment Dorothy provided. While he retained some fragmented memories of his ordeal, they had been integrated into his understanding as bad dreams that were now over. His resilience served as a testament to the healing power of unconditional love and security. Margaret Sullivan had become an unexpected addition to their extended family. Her guilt over her initial silence transformed into determined advocacy for trafficking victims. She volunteered at a nonprofit organization that provided support services for recovered children and their families, channeling her nursing skills and moral courage into preventing future crimes. Thunder's story had inspired legislation at both state and federal levels requiring enhanced training for K-9 units in recognizing human trafficking situations. His ability to detect danger that humans had missed became a case study in law enforcement academies, and his partnership with Emma was held up as a model for the bond between officers and their animal partners. As they gathered around Dorothy's table for dinner, the simple domesticity of the scene belied the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. Emma carved the roast while Dorothy served vegetables. Ethan chattered about his day at the new daycare center where security measures ensured his safety, and Thunder lay contentedly beside the table, his brown eyes reflecting the peace that had finally settled over all of them. "Sometimes I think about all those other families who got their children back because Thunder wouldn't stay quiet," Dorothy mused as she watched Ethan feed Thunder scraps under the table. "One bark at the right moment changed so many lives." Emma looked around the table at this unlikely family formed by crisis and bonded by love. Thunder wasn't just her K-9 partner anymore. He was Ethan's protector, Dorothy's honorary grandson, and living proof that sometimes the most important voices belong to those who cannot speak with words. As the evening light faded over Denver, they settled in for their weekly movie night. Ethan curled between Dorothy and Thunder on the small couch, Emma in the worn armchair that had become her designated spot in their family circle. The apartment felt like home in a way that transcended its modest size, filled with the quiet contentment of people who had survived something terrible together and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Thunder's steady breathing provided a rhythmic backdrop to Ethan's sleepy questions about the animated movie they were watching, his massive form serving as both pillow and guardian for the child who had taught them all that healing was possible, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that love had the power to overcome even the darkest chapters of human cruelty. Sometimes the most profound love stories aren't written in romance novels. They're lived in the quiet moments when ordinary people refuse to give up on those who need them most. Dorothy Williams could have accepted what everyone told her, that at 73, living on Social Security, she was powerless against a system that dismissed her as a confused old woman. Instead, she sold her wedding ring, spent her last dollar, and never stopped believing that her grandson was out there waiting for her to bring him home. Thunder, a traumatized rescue dog, could have retreated into his own pain, but he chose to become a guardian for a child he'd never met. Their story reminds us that our most difficult seasons often prepare us for our most important purposes. Age doesn't diminish our capacity to fight for justice. It deepens our understanding of what truly matters. The voice of experience, dismissed by a hurried world, sometimes carries the wisdom that saves lives. Dorothy's persistence didn't just rescue Ethan, it exposed a criminal network and brought healing to dozens of families. Her story proves that it's never too late to be someone's hero, and that the combination of love, determination, and faith can move mountains, even when the whole world tells you to sit down and be quiet. Have you ever had to stand up for what's right when everyone told you to stay silent? What moment in your life required you to trust your instincts despite opposition from others? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else to keep fighting for what matters. Detective Emma Thornton's radio crackled mid-step, her hand freezing on Thunder's leash as the German Shepherd's ears snapped forward like radar dishes locking onto a target. The woman wasn't running, wasn't shouting, just gliding through Denver International's crowded terminal with a sleeping child pressed against her shoulder, yet Thunder erupted into barking so violent it shattered the ambient hum of Gate B7. Coffee cups hit the floor, phones stopped mid-conversation, and 200 strangers turned to stare as the battle-scarred K9 planted himself between the well-dressed woman and the boarding gate, his massive frame trembling with something Emma had never seen in 12 years of partnership: desperation. An elderly woman burst through the security checkpoint, her weathered hands clutching a faded photograph, and the single word that escaped her lips made Emma's blood run cold. "Ethan." The sleeping child hadn't stirred once. Not at Thunder's deafening barks, not at the chaos erupting around him, not even when his tiny arm slipped lifelessly from beneath the blue blanket. "Lock down the terminal," Emma commanded into her radio. Though every instinct screamed this was already too late. What had Thunder seen that 200 pairs of human eyes had missed? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Thunder had never been ordinary, even by German Shepherd standards. Emma Thornton watched her partner's coal-black coat ripple with tension as he maintained his protective stance, remembering the day she'd first met him at the rehabilitation center 3 years ago. The trainer had warned her then, "This dog has seen things no animal should see." He was found guarding his owner's body for 3 days after a house fire, wouldn't let anyone near her until we sedated him. That trauma had carved something profound into Thunder's soul, an ability to sense human distress that went beyond normal K9 training. While other dogs detected drugs or explosives, Thunder read people. He could spot a grieving parent from across a crowded room, identify a lost child before they even started crying, and somehow distinguish between legitimate fear and the cold calculation of predators. Emma's own path to the K9 unit had been equally marked by loss. 15 years ago, her 8-year-old sister, Sarah, had vanished during a family camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. 300 volunteers, helicopters, search dogs, nothing. The case file gathering dust on some detective's desk contained a single haunting photograph: Sarah's favorite teddy bear found beside a creek, 20 miles from their campsite. Emma became a cop to find answers that never came, and requested the K9 unit because dogs saw what humans missed. The partnership between Emma and Thunder was built on shared understanding of abandonment and loss. Her small apartment near downtown Denver bore evidence of their bond. Thunder's orthopedic bed beside her own, his medication schedule taped to the refrigerator beside hers, his veterinary bills that consumed most of her $47,000 annual salary. He wasn't just her working partner, he was family, the only family she had left. Standing now in the chaos of Gate B7, Emma recognized the specific quality of Thunder's distress. His barking had the same desperate pitch she'd heard only twice before. Once, when they'd discovered a kidnapped child in a shipping container, and once, when he'd found human remains buried in a basement. This wasn't alerting to contraband or suspicious behavior. This was Thunder screaming that something terrible was happening to an innocent. The woman holding the child appeared perfectly normal. Designer coat, expensive handbag, the kind of traveler who belonged in first class. Her identification read Ashley Chen Murphy. Her boarding pass showed a connection to Phoenix, and her demeanor remained calm despite the commotion surrounding her. But Thunder's reaction suggested something far more sinister than a routine family trip. Emma's radio crackled again. Detective Thornton, we've got a 73-year-old woman at Security Checkpoint C claiming someone stole her grandson. Says she's been searching for 3 days. Dorothy Williams, local resident. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Emma looked from the sleeping child to the woman holding him, then to Thunder, whose brown eyes held an intelligence that sometimes frightened her. Whatever he was trying to tell her, she'd learned long ago to listen. The terminal around them buzzed with nervous energy as travelers began recording the confrontation, their phones capturing what might become evidence in a case none of them yet understood. Dorothy Williams arrived at Gate B7 like a force of nature despite her 73 years. Her silver hair escaped from its morning bun, and her sensible shoes clicking against the polished terminal floor with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. She clutched a manila envelope against her chest, its contents worn from constant handling over the past 3 days of searching, praying, and refusing to accept that her grandson had simply vanished from Happy Days daycare without a trace. The moment her eyes locked onto the child in Ashley Chen Murphy's arms, Dorothy's knees nearly buckled. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered. Then louder, her voice carrying the authority of 4 decades teaching elementary school. "That's my Ethan. That's my baby." Ashley's composed facade flickered for just an instant, a tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shift in her grip on the child. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're mistaken. This is my son, Mason. We're traveling to Phoenix to visit his father." But Dorothy was already moving forward, her weathered hands trembling as she opened the envelope. Photographs spilled out like fallen leaves, Ethan blowing out candles on his 4th birthday cake, Ethan feeding ducks at Washington Park, Ethan asleep in the very blue blanket that now wrapped the motionless child. "Look at him," Dorothy pleaded to the growing crowd. "Look at the birthmark behind his left ear. My grandson has a crescent-shaped mark from when he fell off his tricycle last summer." Emma watched Thunder's behavior intensify as Dorothy approached. The German Shepherd's protective instincts kicked into overdrive, but his focus remained split between the child and the woman holding him. Something in Ashley's scent, her body language, or perhaps just the wrongness of the entire situation was triggering every alarm Thunder possessed. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Emma said, positioning herself where she could observe both women and maintain visual contact with Thunder. "And I'll need to verify the child's identity." Ashley's response came too quickly, too rehearsed. "Of course, officer. My driver's license is right here." She fumbled with her designer purse, trying to maintain her grip on the sleeping child while producing a California license that looked pristine, too pristine, Emma noted, for someone who supposedly used it regularly. The license read Ashley Chen Murphy, but when Emma ran it through the system on her phone, red flags immediately appeared. The address corresponded to a vacant lot in San Diego, and the DMV photo, while similar, showed subtle differences in facial structure that suggested professional alteration. "The flight manifest shows no passenger by this name," Emma said carefully, watching Ashley's reaction. "And United Airlines canceled all flights to Phoenix 2 hours ago due to mechanical issues." I meant Southwest," Ashley stammered, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, I'm just flustered. This woman is scaring me, and your dog—" Thunder chose that moment to approach the child directly, his massive head lowering to gently sniff near the boy's face. What happened next would haunt Emma for years afterward. Thunder whimpered, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from the depths of his scarred soul, and began pawing at the ground in the exact pattern he used when he'd found deceased victims. Dorothy gasped, recognizing the implications immediately. "Why won't he wake up? Ethan's the lightest sleeper in the world. He wakes up when I turn pages in my book from the next room." Her voice rose to near hysteria. "What did you do to him?" The crowd that had initially been merely curious began to shift, phones appearing as travelers sensed they were witnessing something far more serious than a simple family dispute. A businessman in his 50s stepped forward. "Hey, shouldn't we call the police?" Another voice from the back. "Someone should check if that kid's even breathing." Ashley's calm began cracking under the pressure. "He's fine, he's just tired. We had an early morning flight from—" She stopped, realizing she'd contradicted herself again about their departure point. Emma made the decision that would change everything. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under investigative detention pending verification of this child's identity and welfare." She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, I need paramedics to Gate B7, possible child endangerment situation. Also requesting backup and a child welfare specialist." Thunder had positioned himself in what Emma recognized as his full protection stance. Body low, muscles coiled, eyes locked on Ashley with the intensity of a predator. He wouldn't move now. Not for commands, not for treats, not until he was satisfied the child was safe. Dorothy sank into a nearby chair, clutching her photographs. "I've been looking everywhere," she whispered to no one in particular. "I've spent every penny I have, called every number, knocked on every door. When the police said they had no leads, I hired a private investigator with money I don't have. I haven't slept in 3 days." The child in Ashley's arms remained motionless, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that suggested something far beyond natural sleep. Dr. Benjamin Crawford arrived at Gate B7 with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding respect in crisis situations. At 52, his salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his charcoal wool coat spoke of expensive taste, and the leather briefcase in his hand bore the unmistakable patina of professional success. He moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through water, his presence immediately shifting the dynamics of the confrontation. "I'm Dr. Benjamin Crawford, licensed clinical psychologist," he announced, producing credentials with practiced efficiency. "Airport security contacted me regarding a family welfare situation." His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent decades mediating delicate psychological crises, and Emma found herself instinctively relaxing despite Thunder's continued agitation. Crawford approached Dorothy with the gentle demeanor of a grandfather, his blue eyes radiating compassion. "Ma'am, I understand you're experiencing tremendous distress. Losing a grandchild, especially at your age, can trigger severe psychological responses. What you're experiencing, believing you recognize your grandson in another child, is called displaced grief identification. It's more common than you might think." Dorothy's face crumpled. "Doctor, please, I know my own grandson. I've raised that boy since he was 6 months old. I know every freckle, every scar." "The mind plays powerful tricks when we're desperate," Crawford interrupted softly. "After significant loss, the brain sometimes creates false connections to protect us from unbearable pain. You see this little boy, roughly the same age as Ethan, and your heart wants so badly for it to be him that your perception becomes altered." Emma watched the crowd's reaction shift in Crawford's favor. His explanation sounded reasonable, scientific, and several passengers nodded sympathetically. The businessman who had earlier supported Dorothy now looked uncertain, and even Emma found herself questioning her initial instincts. Perhaps Thunder was reacting to Dorothy's distress rather than actual danger, but Thunder's behavior suggested otherwise. The German Shepherd had never reacted positively to Crawford's presence. In fact, his agitation increased the moment the psychologist arrived. Thunder's hackles remained raised, his body positioned protectively between Crawford and the child, his eyes never leaving the doctor's face. "Officer, may I suggest we resolve this quickly?" Crawford continued, addressing Emma with professional courtesy. "The longer we prolong this situation, the more traumatic it becomes for everyone involved, especially the child and his mother." He gestured toward Ashley, who had remained silent throughout his intervention. "This young woman has endured enough harassment. She has proper identification, travel documents, and her son clearly requires medical attention." Ashley nodded gratefully. "Thank you, doctor. I just want to get Mason to his pediatrician in Phoenix. He's been running a fever, and I gave him children's medication to help him sleep during the flight." She adjusted her grip on the motionless child, and Emma noticed the subtle way she positioned him to prevent clear view of his face. Crawford's explanation for the child's condition sounded plausible, but something nagged at Emma's trained instincts. "Doctor, what specifically makes you confident this is a case of displaced grief, rather than legitimate identification?" "Several factors," Crawford replied smoothly. "The timing. This woman appears at the exact moment when airport security is dealing with an unrelated family dispute. The emotional state, she's clearly been under severe psychological stress. The physical impossibility, her grandson has been missing for days, yet she expects us to believe he's coincidentally appeared at this specific gate at this specific time." He shook his head sadly. "I've seen this pattern dozens of times in my practice." Dorothy's voice cracked with desperation. "Doctor, please just look behind his left ear. There's a crescent-shaped birthmark. If it's not there, I'll leave peacefully. If it is there, then you'll know I'm telling the truth." Crawford's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm. "Ma'am, examining the child would be inappropriate without parental consent, which this mother has rightfully refused. We can't subject a sick child to unnecessary handling based on the delusions of a traumatized elderly woman." The word delusions hit Dorothy like a physical blow. Emma saw the old woman's shoulders sag as the weight of professional opinion turned against her. Around them, passengers were checking their watches, eager to resolve the situation and continue their travels. The sympathy that had initially favored Dorothy was shifting toward Ashley and her sick child. Thunder, however, refused to be swayed by human psychology. He approached Ashley directly, his nose working methodically as he scented the air around the child. What happened next would become a turning point in the investigation. Thunder's entire body went rigid, his ears flattened against his head, and he released a sound Emma had never heard before, part whimper, part growl, entirely heartbreaking. "Your dog seems distressed," Crawford observed, his tone suggesting concern but his eyes showing calculation. "Perhaps he should be removed from the situation." Traumatized animals can become unpredictable, especially in crowded environments. Emma's protective instincts flared. Thunder isn't traumatized. He's trained to detect human distress, and right now he's telling me something is very wrong with this child. "Officer, with respect," Crawford said, his patience wearing thin, "you're allowing emotion to cloud your professional judgment. This woman has clearly manipulated you and your animal into supporting her psychological break from reality. The responsible action is to reunite this mother and child with their medical care in Phoenix." The crowd murmured agreement, but Emma noticed something crucial. Throughout the entire confrontation, the child hadn't moved, not once. Even sedated children typically showed some response to loud voices, bright lights, or physical handling. This child remained as still as death. "I need to see the child's ticket and boarding passes," Emma said firmly, stepping closer to Ashley. "Both original departure and connection." Ashley's composure finally cracked. The tickets are on my phone." The battery died. She fumbled with her device, hands shaking slightly. "Look, officer, my son needs medical attention. Can't we sort this out in Phoenix?" Crawford moved to support Ashley's position, but his intervention felt too orchestrated, too convenient. Emma's 15 years in law enforcement had taught her to recognize when someone was working too hard to control a narrative. Crawford's credentials might be impressive, but his eagerness to end the investigation rather than pursue the truth raised red flags. Thunder made the decision for her. The German shepherd moved with deliberate purpose to block the boarding gate entrance, his body creating an immovable barrier. His message was clear. This child would not be leaving the airport while he drew breath. Emma keyed her radio. Dispatch, I need Child Protective Services and a pediatric medical team at Gate B7 immediately. I also need a full background check on Dr. Benjamin Crawford, licensed psychologist. She met Crawford's startled gaze. Doctor, I'm going to need you to remain available for questioning. For the first time since his arrival, Crawford's professional mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. The pediatric medical team arrived within minutes, led by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a seasoned emergency physician whose 20 years of experience had taught her to read the subtle signs of child endangerment that others might miss. She approached the situation with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen too many cases where minutes meant the difference between life and death. I need to examine the child immediately, Dr. Martinez announced, her voice cutting through the tension at Gate B7. She wore standard hospital scrubs beneath a white coat, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held the sharp focus of a predator hunting for symptoms. Ashley Chen Murphy instinctively tightened her grip on the motionless child. He's fine, just sleeping. We really need to catch our flight. His father is waiting in Phoenix, and he has a doctor's appointment tomorrow morning. Dr. Martinez's expression hardened. Ma'am, that child hasn't moved in over 30 minutes despite significant noise and commotion. That's not normal sleep. That's unconsciousness. She gestured to her medical bag. I need to check his vital signs, pupil response, and breathing patterns immediately. Crawford stepped forward, his professional demeanor intact but his eyes betraying growing concern. Doctor, while I appreciate your medical expertise, we need to consider the psychological trauma we're inflicting on both mother and child. Perhaps a less invasive approach. Step back, sir, Dr. Martinez interrupted sharply. When a child's life may be in danger, psychological concerns become secondary. She looked directly at Ashley. Either you allow me to examine him here, or I'm calling for immediate ambulance transport to Denver General. Your choice. Thunder's behavior became increasingly erratic as the standoff continued. The German shepherd began pacing in tight circles around the group, his whimpering punctuated by sharp barks directed at Crawford. Emma had never seen her partner display such focused aggression toward a specific individual, and his reaction was beginning to influence the crowd's perception of the situation. Dorothy Williams, who had been sitting quietly clutching her photographs, suddenly stood with the determination of someone who had found their final reserves of strength. Doctor, I've been raising children for 40 years, first as a teacher, then as a grandmother. That boy isn't sleeping. When Ethan naps, he talks in his sleep, moves his hands, sometimes even laughs at his dreams. That child hasn't done any of those things. The crowd that had initially supported Crawford's reasonable psychological explanation began to shift as Dr. Martinez took control of the medical assessment. A young mother traveling with her own toddler stepped forward. She's right. My son never stays that still, even when he's exhausted. An elderly gentleman in a military jacket added, Something ain't right here. I've got 5 grandkids, and that's not how healthy children sleep. Emma's radio crackled with urgent information. Detective Thornton, we've got results on your background checks. Dr. Benjamin Crawford's medical license was suspended in California 6 months ago pending investigation into irregular patient treatment protocols. Also, Ashley Chen Murphy. That identity belongs to a woman who died in a car accident 3 years ago in San Diego. The revelation hit the group like a physical shockwave. Crawford's face drained of color, while Ashley's composure completely shattered. That's impossible, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. My name is Ashley Chen Murphy. I have identification, credit cards. Fake documentation isn't that difficult to obtain if you know the right people, Emma said grimly, her hand moving instinctively to her service weapon. Dr. Crawford, I'm going to need you to step away from the woman and child. Now. Crawford's mask of professional concern finally slipped entirely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Officer, you're making a serious mistake. This woman is suffering from severe postpartum depression following the loss of her own child. She requires specialized treatment, not aggressive interrogation. Dr. Martinez had heard enough. She approached Ashley directly, her medical training overriding any psychological concerns. "Ma'am, I'm examining this child now. If you interfere, you'll be charged with endangering his welfare." Without waiting for permission, she gently pulled back the blue blanket covering the boy's face. What she found made her gasp audibly. The child's skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of severe sedation. His pupils were pinpoints despite the bright terminal lighting. And most troubling, there was a small puncture wound behind his left ear, exactly where Dorothy had described Ethan's crescent-shaped birthmark. "This child has been heavily sedated with what appears to be a benzodiazepine compound," Dr. Martinez announced loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "This is not sleep. This is drug-induced unconsciousness. I'm calling for immediate emergency transport." Dorothy let out a sob of relief, mixed with horror. "The birthmark. Is it there? Please just tell me if you can see his birthmark." Dr. Martinez gently tilted the child's head, exposing the area behind his left ear. There, partially obscured by what appeared to be makeup, was a distinctive crescent-shaped mark exactly as Dorothy had described. "Yes," she said quietly. "There's a crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Phones appeared to document the revelation, and several passengers began demanding airport security take immediate action. Ashley began hyperventilating, her carefully constructed persona dissolving into panic. "I didn't mean, he said it would help. I thought—" Crawford made a critical mistake in that moment. Instead of maintaining his psychological expertise facade, he grabbed Ashley's arm and tried to pull her toward a different gate. "We need to leave. Now!" Thunder's response was instantaneous and definitive. The German shepherd launched himself between Crawford and Ashley with the protective fury of an animal defending its pack. His 100-pound frame created an immovable barrier, his deep growls promising violence if Crawford took another step. Emma drew her weapon but kept it lowered. "Dr. Crawford, you're under arrest for child endangerment and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "Ashley Chen Murphy, or whoever you really are, you're also under arrest." She keyed her radio. "All units to Gate B7, we have suspects in custody in a child abduction case." As airport security and backup officers arrived, the full scope of the situation became clear. Dr. Martinez was working frantically to stabilize Ethan's vital signs, while Dorothy knelt beside the medical gurney, tears streaming down her face as she gently stroked her grandson's hair. "Grandma's here, baby," she whispered. "Grandma found you. You're safe now." But even as the immediate crisis resolved, Emma sensed this was only the beginning of a much larger investigation. Crawford's reaction suggested he wasn't just a rogue psychologist who had manipulated one grieving woman. His professional demeanor and resource access pointed to something more systematic and sinister. As the paramedics prepared to transport Ethan to Denver General Hospital, Thunder approached the gurney with unexpected gentleness. The dog that had been so aggressively protective now nuzzled the unconscious child with the tenderness of a parent checking on a sleeping baby. Ethan stirred slightly at Thunder's touch, the first voluntary movement he had made since the confrontation began. Emma watched her partner's behavior with growing understanding. Thunder hadn't just detected danger. He had recognized something specific about this situation that connected to his own traumatic past. The dog's initial owner, the elderly woman he had protected for 3 days after the house fire, had been found with similar puncture wounds behind her ear, evidence of foul play that had been overlooked in the aftermath of the fire. Crawford was led away in handcuffs, but his parting words chilled Emma to the bone. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Detective." "This goes far beyond one old woman and her grandson." Ashley, whose real identity remained unknown, was also taken into custody, but her psychological state suggested she might be as much victim as perpetrator. Her rambling statements about finding her son again and the doctor who promised to help painted a picture of sophisticated psychological manipulation. Dorothy rode in the ambulance with Ethan, her weathered hand holding his small one as the medical team worked to counteract the drugs in his system. She spoke to him continuously, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had never given up hope. "I knew you were out there, sweetheart. Grandma never stopped looking. Thunder found you. That brave dog led us right to you." At the hospital, as Ethan was rushed into emergency care, Emma finally had a moment to process what had happened. Thunder sat beside her in the waiting room, his massive head resting on her knee, his brown eyes reflecting an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You knew from the moment you saw them that something was wrong." Thunder's tail thumped weakly against the floor, but his gaze remained fixed on the emergency room doors where Ethan had disappeared. Dr. Martinez emerged from the treatment room with cautiously optimistic news. "The child is stable. We're running blood tests to identify the specific sedatives used, but his vital signs are improving. He should regain consciousness within the next few hours." She looked at Dorothy with professional compassion. "He's been through a traumatic experience, but children are remarkably resilient. With proper care and therapy, he should make a full recovery." Dorothy's relief was palpable, but Emma could see the questions building in the old woman's eyes. How had this happened? Who was responsible? And most importantly, how many other children might be in danger from whatever network Crawford represented? As the evening wore on, Emma began receiving disturbing reports from other law enforcement agencies. Crawford's suspended medical license was just the tip of the iceberg. He had been under investigation in 3 states for similar cases involving missing children and grieving parents. The scope of his operation suggested resources and connections far beyond what a single psychologist could manage alone. Thunder remained vigilant throughout the night, as if sensing that their work was far from over. The dog that had started this investigation with a desperate bark in an airport terminal had uncovered what appeared to be a sophisticated child trafficking network masquerading as grief counseling services. The Denver General Hospital's Pediatric Intensive Care Unit buzzed with controlled urgency as Ethan Williams began showing signs of consciousness for the first time in 4 days. Dorothy sat beside his bed, her weathered hands clasped around his small fingers, whispering prayers and promises into the sterile air. Thunder lay curled on the floor beside her chair, his massive frame somehow fitting into the small space as if he belonged there, his brown eyes never leaving the child's face. Dr. Martinez checked Ethan's vitals with practiced efficiency, her expression cautiously optimistic. "His neurological responses are improving steadily. The cocktail of drugs they used was sophisticated. Benzodiazepines mixed with something I've never seen before, possibly experimental. Whoever did this has access to pharmaceutical compounds that aren't available through normal medical channels." Emma stood near the window, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with law enforcement agencies across 3 states. The investigation had exploded in scope over the past 24 hours, revealing connections that made her blood run cold. "Crawford's clinic in Boulder has been operating for 18 months, she told Dorothy during a brief break in her calls. FBI estimates they processed over 60 children through their grief counseling program." The word processed hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dorothy's grip on Ethan's hand tightened, her voice barely above a whisper. 60 children? Dear God, what happened to the others? Emma's radio crackled with updates from the ongoing raids. Federal agents had simultaneously struck Crawford's main facility, 3 satellite offices, and 2 residential properties. What they found painted a picture of systematic child trafficking disguised as therapeutic intervention. The basement of Crawford's primary clinic contained a fully equipped medical suite, complete with surgical equipment and recovery rooms designed to look like children's bedrooms. Ashley Chen Murphy, whose real identity had been confirmed as Emily Rodriguez, remained in psychiatric custody at Denver General's Secure Wing. Under careful medical supervision and with the assistance of specialists in cult deprogramming, fragments of her true story were beginning to emerge. She had been a patient of Crawford's legitimate practice 2 years earlier, seeking help after losing her infant son to SIDS. What happened next represented a masterclass in psychological manipulation and exploitation. "He told me Michael's soul had found a new home," Emily had whispered to the psychiatrists. "He showed me pictures of children who looked like my baby, explained how reincarnation worked, how I could be reunited with my son if I just had faith and followed his guidance." Her voice broke. "He said I was chosen, special, that not every mother was strong enough to handle the truth about life after death." Crawford's method was as brilliant as it was evil. He targeted grieving parents at their most vulnerable moments, offering hope where traditional therapy offered only acceptance of loss. His credentials and professional demeanor provided legitimacy, while his carefully crafted philosophy gave desperate people permission to believe impossible things. Once he had identified suitable candidates, he began a process of gradual indoctrination that could take months to complete. The financial investigation revealed the scope of Crawford's operation. Bank records showed payments ranging from $50,000 to $200,000 per reunification, with clients including wealthy families from across the country and several international buyers. Children weren't just being trafficked, they were being sold to the highest bidder under the guise of spiritual adoption. Thunder's role in uncovering the network had become legendary within law enforcement circles. His initial reaction to Ashley and Crawford at the airport had triggered an investigation that was now spanning multiple federal agencies. But Emma noticed her partner paying a psychological price for his heroism. The stress of the past few days had triggered symptoms reminiscent of his original trauma: loss of appetite, hypervigilance, and an inability to sleep unless he could maintain visual contact with Ethan. Dr. James Harrison, the child psychiatrist assigned to Ethan's case, arrived for his evening consultation with a gentle demeanor that immediately put Dorothy at ease. At 45, he had spent his career working with trafficking victims and understood the complex psychological aftermath of such experiences. "Children are remarkably resilient," he told Dorothy, "but Ethan will need specialized therapy to process what happened to him. The combination of drugs and psychological manipulation can create lasting effects." As if summoned by the conversation, Ethan's eyes fluttered open for the first time since his rescue. Dorothy gasped, leaning closer to his bed. "Ethan? Sweet boy, can you hear Grandma?" The child's gaze was unfocused at first, pupils still dilated from the lingering effects of the drugs. But when his eyes found Dorothy's face, something sparked: recognition, relief, and then tears. "Grandma Dot," he whispered, his voice hoarse from days of unconsciousness. "I had scary dreams." Dorothy's composure shattered. 4 days of maintaining strength for everyone around her dissolved as she gently gathered her grandson into her arms, mindful of the IV tubes and monitoring equipment. "You're safe now, baby. Grandma's here, and I'm never letting you out of my sight again." Thunder rose from his position on the floor, approaching the bed with careful steps. Ethan's eyes widened as he noticed the massive German shepherd. "Big doggy," he said, reaching out with the fearless curiosity of a 4-year-old. "That's Thunder," Dorothy explained through her tears. "He's the hero dog who found you and brought you back to me." Thunder allowed Ethan to pet his head, the dog's entire demeanor shifting from protective vigilance to gentle companionship. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from FBI agent Sarah Collins, who was leading the federal investigation. Crawford talking. Says this is just one cell in much larger network. Need to debrief you and Thunder tomorrow morning. The implication was clear. Their work was far from over. Dr. Martinez returned with test results that provided both relief and concern. The good news is that Ethan shows no signs of permanent neurological damage. His blood work is improving rapidly, and his cognitive responses are appropriate for his age. She paused, consulting her charts. The concerning news is that we've identified 3 different compounds in his system, including one that appears to be designed specifically for memory suppression. Dorothy's face went pale. Memory suppression? It's possible they were trying to erase his recollection of his abduction and replace it with false memories, Dr. Martinez explained carefully. This level of pharmaceutical sophistication suggests we're dealing with individuals who have significant medical training and resources. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. If Crawford's network had access to memory-altering drugs, how many other children had been processed through their system without anyone ever knowing? How many families were still searching for children who had been made to forget their original identities? Thunder seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The German shepherd positioned himself so that he could maintain visual contact with both Ethan and the room's entrance, his training and instincts creating a protective perimeter around the vulnerable child. As evening settled over Denver General, the scope of the investigation continued to expand. Police departments from California to Florida were reopening cold cases involving missing children and suspicious adoption agencies. Crawford's network appeared to have been operating for years, hidden behind legitimate medical practices and child welfare organizations. Dorothy's phone rang with calls from reporters wanting to interview the grandmother who never gave up searching for her grandson. She declined them all, focusing entirely on Ethan's recovery. "Those vultures can wait," she told Emma. "My boy needs quiet time to heal, not cameras and questions." The financial cost of Ethan's ordeal was becoming clear. Dorothy's medical insurance covered basic hospitalization, but the specialized psychiatric care he would need, the security measures necessary to protect him from retaliation, and the legal expenses of pursuing justice against Crawford's network threatened to bankrupt her modest retirement resources. Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. "Mrs. Williams, Thunder and I want to contribute to Ethan's care fund. It's not much on a detective's salary, but this case has become personal for both of us." Thunder's connection to Ethan had transcended professional duty. The dog's protective instincts had evolved into genuine affection, and Emma could see that separating them would be traumatic for both the child and her partner. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "Thunder seems to have appointed himself as Ethan's personal guardian. If you're agreeable, we'd like to maintain regular contact during his recovery." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Honey, that dog saved my grandson's life. You both have a place in this family for as long as you want it." Dr. Harrison returned with preliminary results from Ethan's psychological evaluation. "He's remarkably stable considering what he's been through. Children his age often cope better with trauma than adults because they haven't yet learned that the world isn't supposed to be dangerous." He looked at Dorothy with professional admiration. "The strong foundation you provided him before this happened is serving him well now." As the night shift took over at the hospital, Emma prepared to return to her apartment for the first time in 4 days. Thunder, however, refused to leave his post beside Ethan's bed. No amount of coaxing could convince him to abandon his self-appointed guard duty. "Let him stay," Dorothy suggested. "The nurses said he's not bothering anyone, and Ethan sleeps better when Thunder's nearby." She looked at the unlikely pair, the traumatized child and the scarred dog who had found each other in crisis, and smiled through her exhaustion. "Sometimes God sends angels with 4 legs," instead of wings. Emma's radio crackled one final time before she left the hospital. Agent Collins's voice carried urgency. "Detective Thornton, we've got a situation developing. Crawford's attorney is claiming his client was operating under federal authority as part of an undercover investigation. Says he has documentation proving his innocence." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. If Crawford had been working with law enforcement, everything they thought they knew about the case could be turned upside down. The legal implications for their investigation, for the children they thought they had rescued, for Dorothy and Ethan's future, suddenly became terrifyingly uncertain. Thunder looked up from his position beside Ethan's bed, his intelligent eyes meeting Emma's across the room. The dog's expression seemed to say what they were both thinking. This fight was far from over, and the real battle for justice was just beginning. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver had become a fortress of legal warfare, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of attorneys, FBI agents, and reporters who sensed that the Crawford case was about to explode into something far more devastating than anyone had imagined. Emma Thornton sat in the witness preparation room, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed the documents that had arrived that morning from Crawford's defense team. The papers were authentic. Federal authorization codes, Department of Justice letterhead, and signatures from officials whose names she recognized from national news coverage of child trafficking investigations. According to the documentation, Dr. Benjamin Crawford had been operating as an undercover asset for a joint FBI-DOJ task force targeting international adoption fraud and child trafficking networks. His clinic had been a carefully constructed front operation designed to infiltrate and expose criminal organizations. Thunder lay at Emma's feet, his massive form still radiating the tension that had never fully left him since the airport confrontation. The German shepherd's instincts hadn't changed despite the legal developments. He remained convinced that Crawford represented a genuine threat to Ethan and other children. Dorothy Williams entered the preparation room supported by her court-appointed victim advocate, a young woman named Lisa Chen who had been working around the clock to help the elderly grandmother navigate the increasingly complex legal situation. Dorothy's face showed the strain of the past week. Sleepless nights at Ethan's bedside, constant worry about his psychological recovery, and now the terrifying possibility that the man who had orchestrated her grandson's kidnapping might walk free. "They're saying he was one of the good guys," Dorothy said, her voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and despair. "How can that be true? How can someone who drugged my grandson and put him through hell be working for the law?" FBI agent Sarah Collins entered with a grim expression that immediately heightened the tension in the room. At 38, Collins had spent her career investigating child trafficking cases, and her reputation for thoroughness and integrity was legendary within federal law enforcement. She carried a thick file folder and a tablet computer loaded with evidence that would either validate or destroy Crawford's claims. "We've spent the last 48 hours verifying Crawford's documentation," Collins began, her voice professionally neutral. "The authorization codes are genuine, the signatures are authentic, and the federal task force he claims to have been working with does exist." She paused, letting the implication settle. "However, there are significant discrepancies in his story that suggest his operation went far beyond any authorized parameters." Emma felt a surge of hope. "What kind of discrepancies?" Collins opened her file folder, revealing bank statements and financial records that painted a damning picture. Crawford's undercover operation was supposed to last 6 months and target specific criminal networks in California and Nevada. Instead, he operated for over 2 years, expanded into multiple states, and accumulated personal assets exceeding $3 million. She looked directly at Dorothy. None of that money was ever turned over to federal authorities. The financial evidence was devastating, but Collins had more. We've also identified at least 12 children who were processed through Crawford's facilities but never recovered by law enforcement. If he was running a legitimate undercover operation, those children should have been rescued and returned to their families." Her voice hardened. "Instead, they've vanished into adoption networks that we're only beginning to trace." Thunder raised his head, sensing the shift in emotional energy around the room. The dog's protective instincts had been validated. Crawford was indeed the predator Thunder had recognized him to be, regardless of whatever official documentation he might possess. Dorothy's advocate Lisa Chen raised a crucial question that cut to the heart of the legal challenge they faced. Even if Crawford exceeded his authority, doesn't his federal authorization provide him with some legal protection? Can we still prosecute him for what happened to Ethan? Collins's expression grew darker. That's where this case becomes complicated. Crawford's attorneys are arguing that everything he did falls under federal immunity because he was operating as a government agent. They're claiming that even if he made mistakes or exceeded his authority, he can't be prosecuted by state authorities for actions taken in furtherance of a federal investigation. Emma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The heroic rescue of Ethan, Thunder's instinctive protection, Dorothy's determination, all of it could be rendered meaningless by legal technicalities and federal bureaucracy. What about Emily Rodriguez? What's her status in all this? "That's actually where we might have our strongest case," Collins replied, consulting her tablet. "Emily was never part of any authorized operation. Crawford recruited her independently, used her as an unwitting accomplice, and manipulated her psychological state to make her compliant. Her victimization is clearly outside any federal authority he might have possessed." The door to the preparation room opened, and Dr. James Harrison entered with an update on Ethan's condition that would prove crucial to the legal proceedings. And the child psychiatrist's expression was troubled as he reviewed his most recent evaluation notes. "Ethan is making remarkable progress physically, but we've discovered something disturbing in his psychological assessment," Dr. Harrison reported. "He has fragmented memories of other children at Crawford's facility, children who were crying, children who were taken away, children who never came back." He looked at Dorothy with professional compassion. "Your grandson witnessed things that no 4-year-old should ever see." Dorothy's face went ashen. "What kind of things?" Dr. Harrison hesitated, clearly struggling with how much detail to share. "He remembers a room with multiple beds, other children who seemed sick or sleepy, and adults in white coats who gave shots that made the children stop crying." He paused. "Most disturbingly, he's asked several times about a little girl named Sarah who was taken to the airplane and never returned." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. And Sarah, her sister who had vanished 20 years ago during a family camping trip. The coincidence seemed impossible, but Thunder's reaction to the name was immediate and intense. The German Shepherd stood, his ears pricked forward, his body language suggesting recognition of something significant. Collins noticed Thunder's behavior and made a connection that would reshape the entire investigation. "Detective Thornton, what was your sister's full name?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah Elizabeth Thornton. She disappeared in 1998, age 8, from Rocky Mountain National Park." Her hands shook as the implications began to dawn on her. "But that's impossible. Crawford's operation only started 2 years ago." "Not Crawford's current operation," Collins said grimly. "But if he's been involved in child trafficking for decades, using different covers and different methods—" She trailed off, consulting her tablet frantically. "We need to run a comprehensive background check going back 20 years, cross-reference missing children cases with any medical facilities or child psychology practices Crawford might have been associated with." Thunder's agitation increased as the conversation continued. The dog began pacing the small room, his whimpering taking on the same desperate quality Emma had heard at the airport. Something about this discussion was triggering memories or instincts that connected to his own traumatic past. Dorothy watched Thunder's behavior with growing understanding. "That dog knows something we don't," she said quietly. "He's been trying to tell us from the beginning that this goes deeper than just what happened to Ethan." Dr. Harrison made an observation that sent chills through everyone in the room. If Crawford has been operating for decades, and if he's been using federal cover stories to protect his activities, then we might be looking at one of the largest and longest-running child trafficking operations in American history. He looked at his notes about Ethan's fragmented memories. That little boy might be one of the few surviving witnesses to crimes that span multiple decades. The weight of that realization settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Crawford wasn't just a rogue psychologist who had manipulated grieving parents. He was potentially a predator who had been using government authority to facilitate crimes against children for most of his career. The scope of potential victims, the political implications of federal complicity, and the legal challenges of prosecuting someone with such extensive official protection seemed almost insurmountable. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message that would prove to be the final, devastating blow of the day. Agent Collins read it over her shoulder, and her face went white. "What is it?" Dorothy asked, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Collins spoke slowly, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "Crawford's attorneys have just filed for his immediate release on federal immunity grounds. They're also requesting that all evidence seized from his facilities be suppressed as the fruits of an unauthorized investigation into a legitimate federal operation." She looked at Dorothy with something approaching despair. "They want him released within 48 hours. Thunder's mournful howl filled the room, a sound of anguish that seemed to capture the helplessness they all felt as justice appeared to slip away from them once again.